You heard a little bit of our history. It stood up. That's impressive. I really did. But this, my name's Bruce Williams, and I live in Granbury, Texas. And this is my wife, Susan, who I was referring to throughout. And this is Kim Mewes. And how many of you have been to Kim's sessions earlier today? So you were wise, good choices. And we've had the privilege of working together for 18 years, Kim and I. And so it's really a blessing to be able to stand in Branson, Missouri, and to do this together. And we've never done it. And I'm shocked that she's doing this. Not this part, but this that she's even here doing it. This is not her favorite thing to do, is get up in front of people and talk in this type of setting. So I'm... What was that? And God is good. Yeah, and God is very good. May I pray? Father in heaven, we thank you. We thank you that you are such a kind and gracious and loving God to us as your children. Thank you for drawing us, calling us into yourself. Father, for giving us the ears to hear the beauty of the gospel, for the eyes to see the beauty of your holiness. And Father, we ask that you would just use this time in our lives as well to further your kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. Help us to see rightly the things that you have established in your word. And we praise you for that. And it's in Christ's name now that we pray. Amen. How many of you are administrators? Just to get a lay of the land here. Just a few? Okay. So the way Kim and I are going to structure this, she is very good with details. And I am more of an idea, visionary type person. And so I'm going to lay out some principles, and then Kim will give you real specifics, all right? And so, as I mentioned in that last talk, that I end up going to many situations, school-wise, and asking that question, what is your discipline policy? And what I mean by that isn't this, we love discipline or anything like that, It really is, how are we going to handle discipline? And there's many different ways. Susan likes to bring this point up. There's principles and there's methods. There's principles and there's methods, and they are distinctly different. And I didn't get to this in my talk, but let me just share with you a definition of principles, if I can find it. And it's important that you lay out your principles as an administrator. What is it that you truly believe? We're classical and we're Christian. We believe in the trivium. We believe in the 3 stages. All of that. But what is it that you really believe about discipline? And it needs to be clear. And it does make you laugh when somebody says that they really have good kids. And we got so-called good kids. But we all know that they sin. And we as staff sin, our parents sin, our kids sin. So the issue isn't whether we sin. What's the issue? How we are going to deal with sin. That's the issue. That's what has to be determined. This is how we're going to deal with sin. And it is an institution, and you do have to be a bit more generic. But let me read this to you, please. Principled thinking. And you're not going to be able to copy all of this. I'm sorry, it's a few sentences, but if you can listen. The power of principles is that they are universal. They're overarching, they're universal. And they are timeless truths. They aren't determined by circumstances. So they're universal principles that are timeless, and they're true. If we understand and live our lives based on principles, we can quickly adapt to whatever the circumstances are. So, and boy, when you got issues coming in your door, whether it's parent issue or student issue, what are we doing? We're praying for wisdom. We're praying for wisdom because there's no rule book on how you deal with it. So you're just praying, God's grace abound, God's grace abound. Give me something. So quickly adapt. We can apply them anywhere. By teaching our children principles instead of practices, or teaching them the principles behind the practices, we better equip them to handle the unknown challenges of the moment. So we need to teach our children principles. So when I say, be wise, what do you want me to do? Be wise. Well, that's really vague. But they can do that. Because you know what? You're teaching them Proverbs. We happen to have a rule, or yeah, I'll say a rule, encouragement. They have to memorize Proverbs. Each grade members, there's 2 chapters of Proverbs a year. So I don't have any of my staff in here. I wonder why. I think that, this is our 3rd year of doing it down there, but they're up to chapter 9, the older kids. Where are some of your students at now?
Probably 17.
Because she's in the grammar stage for those high school kids, so they're up to chapter 17 and they've got memorized. Now, Sue and I have made an agreement, and it still works for the Oaks, and we have it at our school, Grace, that if any of them memorize all 31 chapters of Proverbs when they graduate, so it has to be their senior year, and they can sit down and go through all 31 chapters with me, I'll give them $1,000. So, and you know what? There's 950 some verses. So that's a little over $1 a verse. That's a pretty good deal, I think. And whether that happens, I don't know. But anyway, this is the incentive. But they're learning Proverbs, so they are being given the wisdom to be able to think well. And that's what you're asking them. All right. By understanding the principles, we are able to meet the challenges of the moment more effectively. And we are also better equipped to meet the thousands of challenges of the future as well. So by teaching them biblical principles, you are truly equipping them. So what are the biblical principles that we want to have in our discipline policy? Well, what's the first ACE is what? I was just preparing, all of that was preparation for in here. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. It has to be paramount. Then think more highly of others than you think of yourself. That has to be there. Be wise might be another one. But they need to think more highly of others than they think of themselves. All right, so what is our discipline policy? Our discipline policy is called a name on the board check mark. This is a method. This is not a principle, all right? This is a method. This is how we do it. Name on the board check mark. So every single parent that sits down to enter our school, I meet with them for an hour and a half. And I go through what we will do. So they understand the whole abdication, usurpation thing that I was alluding to in there, that they understand that we are coming alongside them. When they enroll their children, we are coming alongside them. We are not there to lead them through this. We're coming alongside the parents. All right, all of that. But then I go through the disciplines. So, the first 2 weeks of the school year, the teachers train to what the expectations are. Key word there is what? Train. You're not commanding, you're not telling them, don't do this or you must do this. You are training the students to what the expectations are. Obvious one is you must raise your hand, wait until you're called on before you say anything. And you're training to that. And then during that 2-week period of time, as I said, it's called name on the board check mark. We're training, hey Johnny, just so you know, that would be a name on the board. So I'm just writing your name on the board so you'll know that would be that. No repercussions right now in this first 2 weeks, but that's just a helpful reminder. Anytime they get their name on the board, they lose their recess. They lose their recess. Now, for a little boy, that could be the end of the world, right? But what we want that to represent, or to them, we want it to be a change of behavior. We want them to change their behavior, so they lose their recess. Anytime a name goes on the board, the teacher has to call home that day. Anytime a name goes on the board, the teacher must call home that day. Doesn't have to be during the school hours, it could be in the evening. Whenever. And they don't have to actually get a hold of the parent. If they get a voicemail, that's fine. All right? But they have to call home that day. I'm telling every parent this. Everything. I've said this talk, can you imagine, over 22 years? Probably 2,000 times maybe? I don't know. Close. A lot. And I use the exact same words every time. Because I don't want a parent come back and say, oh, you said, no, I know I didn't say that. I've done this too many times. And I had one in my office just the other day trying to play that card. A dad I haven't seen since the beginning of the school year. Beginning of the school year in my office the other day saying, you didn't, no, I know what I said. And he's an abdicating father. And I'm not going to let him push me into a corner and say, because I want to be clear. And so they have to call home. Now, after a 2-week period of time goes by, then we're putting names on the board. All right? So Johnny, your name's on the board. You're going to miss your recess. And it's important that you help them understand why their name just went on the board. All right? It isn't just simply do it and then keep moving on. They need to know how to do it. You may have to take them out in the hallway to talk to them, whatever, but just, and we don't need to write it in, 55 font, just over there on the side and what have you. Then, in the course of the day, Johnny might do the same thing again, or he may do something else that was inappropriate. Then he would get a check mark by his name. And anytime a student, in this policy, in this method, anytime a student gets a check mark by their name, they are coming to the office. That means they've won a free trip. And we get time together. All right? So the teacher would escort the student down to the office. They would sit on the little bench outside the door. The teacher would come in and close the door behind and then explain to me, Johnny got his name on the board for this, he got a check mark for this. So I make sure I understand what's happened. Now, as I shared earlier, he who speaks first always seems right. So the teachers had the opportunity to speak first. I don't make any judgments. I got to be careful because it's really easy to go there real quick. I trust my staff, but sometimes it doesn't always go quite that way. And so I've just heard the first side of the story. Teacher leaves, goes back to the classroom, the student comes in, they sit down, and I pray with them. And basically my prayer is that God, thank you for this opportunity, and I pray that you will help Johnny to be honest and forthright in what he has to say, and give me the ears to hear. Amen. Then I ask the student, why are they here? Even kindergarten, why are you here? They can't remember 5 minutes ago why they got their name on the board or a check mark. But at least I'm asking them. But, did you maybe do this? Oh yeah, I did that. Yeah, okay, just checking. But you want them to verbalize what the issue was. That they are taking ownership of it. They can see it as well as they can see it, whatever that means. But have them verbalize it. All right, then what should you have done? So guess what I'm doing? Training. I'm training, reinforcing. What should have happened? So what should you have done, Johnny? Well, Mr. Williams, I should have raised my hand and I should have waited until it was called on. And you help them with that. All right. then what do we need to do to make it right? Now, I'm really dogmatic on this. I would encourage you to be dogmatic. This is beyond method. This is the principle. 1 John 1:9 says what? Amen. Great verse. Remember that verse? What are we supposed to do? Confess. We don't say I'm sorry. I'm sorry does not fly. It does not fly. God's not interested in I'm sorry. When I changed this years and years ago, oh man, it was like watching too young a crowd here. But there's some of us who are a little older. Fonzie on Happy Days, what couldn't he say?
I'm sorry.
He couldn't get I'm sorry out for his life. It's not like that. But it was really interesting how many kids could easily say I'm sorry. It's just easy. It just flows right off their tongue. Ask them to say, will you please forgive me? Oh my goodness. It was like, yeah, somebody taking their tongue out. And it was transformative. It really was. I don't like my staff to even say, you need to apologize. I really don't like them. We don't need apologies. We need forgiveness and seeking forgiveness. All right. Now, if a kid said, I'm sorry, will you please forgive me? Totally fine with that. That's not a problem. But so I ask them, would you like to ask God to forgive you? And they almost always want to. And then I ask them to pray out loud. And it's training time because they don't know how to pray oftentimes. And you just help them. It's fun. And it's fun with the ones that repeat, that come in. They get it. They get it. They know how to do it. And it isn't, they just, it's fun. It's fun to hear their prayers. And it's encouraging. So they pray and ask for forgiveness. You do have repeats, yes. Doug Wilson says it so well. I love this. You have more than one child. Do some children need more baths than others? Yeah, they do, because they get dirtier than others. Some kids need to ask for forgiveness more often than others, because they sin more often. And so you're just helping them take a bath. And it's really a blessing to be able to be a part of it. And so then now what do we need to do to make it right in the way of restitution, so to speak, but resolving it? I need to ask so-and-so for forgiveness. And I ask them to work on the wording, especially the younger one, but making sure. And then I close in prayer, walk them down to the classroom. The teachers come out into the hallway, and then they'll ask for forgiveness. The principle here is that the seeking of forgiveness has to be as wide as the sin was. All right? Now, I don't treat blurting out in class that way, because they'd be up in front of the class asking for forgiveness the whole day. And I don't treat blurting that way, but by and large, they need to ask for forgiveness of whoever was exposed to the sin. So I ask the teachers to literally get, on the little ones, get down on a knee and get eye to eye with the student. And then, see, you're not even going to, you might as well have a chair. And get right there in their eye, and then, will you please forgive me? And then it's important that they what? Name it. They don't get to be vague on this. They don't get to be vague. They don't get to be dismissive of it. You want them to be specific. Because you're loving the kid. What are you doing? You know what you're doing? If you can imagine them carrying around a backpack full of rocks, sin encumbers. It drags them down. And their parents aren't investing the time into them to help unload these backpacks. We have a saying at the school. You haven't heard this. Name on the board, the kids respond, go make it right. Name on the board, go make it right. As soon as they can make it right, and I've got this one little African American girl in our school that I just love. There's a reason for the tears, just a second. You have to be so patient with me. Single mom, never been married, only African American child in our class. or in our school. And her mom has terminal cancer, and she lives with her grandparents. And they're wonderful, but oh, it's a hard situation. It's hard. And she is a really awkward little girl. But you know what? When her name goes on the board, boom, that hand goes up right away. And she, Mr. Taylor, will you please forgive me? That's her teacher right now. And she's good about it. And you know what? I don't know if this is wrong to say on camera, but, you know, she's Catholic, and she gets this. And it's cool. It really is cool. She carries around so much condemnation, though, and you just hurt for her, and she wants it off her back so bad. But anyway, you're unloading the backpack. You're taking those rocks out. When that kid comes and he's distraught in the morning because he's got unresolved issues at home, you're just helping him take that backpack off. And what a blessing. And they just float around all day. Because they don't have that weight to hold them down. And it's cool. All right. So name on the board, check mark. Then, after that, you know, you've left the child with the teacher, then I go back and I am the one that has to call now. Gets to call. I get to call. And I call the dad. So whenever it's a name on the board, check mark, I call the dad. And if I can't get a hold of dad, then I call mom. Let somebody know that Johnny was in my office. All right? Now, if Johnny gets his name on the board and a check mark a second time, and it's within a couple of months, when I was at that school, I loved it because I got to spank. And it makes a world of difference. I thought about this last night when would I go here on this talk. It is such a blessing to be able to discipline that way in a school. And that is in Washington. What's the most liberal state in the union? Maybe not Washington, but pretty darn close. And I live in the what state now? Maybe the most conservative, and they won't let me, my board won't let me spank. And it makes a big difference in our school. And if you are allowed to spank in your school, if your board will allow it, utilize it. Don't say you spank and then you don't do it. It's a great, loving tool. It is a blessing. And it really, really is. If your board allows it. We spanked on average 36 times a year. It was just kind of like clockwork. You can't believe it, can you? You're just laughing. Amen, brother. What year are you?
Senior.
Yeah. I've spanked a kid after he graduated. No, I haven't. But yeah, yeah. So if you do have that tool, but anyway, if you don't, then it makes it a lot more complicated. But within the first couple of months, if they're back in the office with name on the board check mark, I might spank on the second one, possibly. But every parent knows that. They know it. If there's a third name on the board check mark, I definitely have the parents in my office and we talk about it. Fourth name on the board check mark, they get suspended for 2 days, meaning they lose the privilege to be at school. This is over the course of a year. You don't start over each quarter or the semester. This is over the course of the year. And then if a fifth name on the board check mark, then it's likely they'll be expelled. All right, is there latitude? Yes, there's latitude, and it doesn't have to be this rigid. But at least they know those guidelines. Yeah. All right, so does that give you enough to work off of for right now?
I think so.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I had a quick question.
Please.
The word on the name, check mark, is it for things as little as just not raising my hand?
Yep, it is.
So now I'm thinking our school is the opposite of that school that had all wonderful kids, because our kids would be in my office.
Oh, yeah. No, it's amazing how lax we get.
Okay.
Yeah, we really don't have very high standards.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I better let her get up here because I'll just keep on going.
Sorry.
Okay. No, not you. I'm just saying,
No, I mean,
you don't have to apologize. No, that just gives me more. I see things you can't believe when I go on accreditation visits. And then I could go there for a long time.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you for being in the session this afternoon. My name is Kim Mewes, and I am in my 21st year at the Oaks Classical Christian Academy. 10 years teaching 5th grade, 7 years doing something called head of grammar school, and now I'm back in the classroom. Yeah. And it's, you know, and I'm saying that a little tongue-in-cheek, but all the time that I did head of grammar school, a privilege, a blessing. What Bruce is speaking on resonates, and now I understand it at a much deeper level than I would have if I had not been given the opportunity to serve as head of grammar school. And but truly God called me to be a teacher. And so I would have people say, "What do you do?" And I'd say, "I'm a teacher." I'm an administrator. So I'm back to being a teacher, but you know what? Teaching staff and teaching students and being called by God to do what He has equipped us to do is whatever the title is. So just be obedient and do what God calls you to. One of the things that I wanted to talk about with discipline is just how you actually implement it in the classroom. Because as you listen to it, first of all, the understanding is, how do you feel about discipline? When someone says, we discipline our students, or there's a discipline policy, if your first gut reaction is, ooh, that's bad, or, oh, I don't want to put a name on the board, I don't want to have to discipline my students, then it needs to start with us understanding rightly what discipline is. It's discipleship, it's heart transformation, it's a culture of grace, not a legalistic culture. It truly is giving your students the freedom to love what they're doing in the classroom because you've put up great fence lines. And so when I would visit with the little ones and they'd come in and they'd have their name on the board and we went through the discipline policy, I would say, you know what your teachers are doing? They're putting these wonderful fences in place so that you can have a great time in the classroom. So we want to love you by putting up those boundaries, and we love our students the best when we're very clear about what the boundaries are. So when they walk into your classroom, what is the benefit of the discipline policy being school-wide is they don't come from one class to another class and have great variation in what the discipline policy is. That's the opposite of loving our students, because we are always training. So if one teacher is training with very clear guidelines in the classroom, the next teacher is really enjoying the kids being their friends and having very open policy. We're not loving the students because they're having to all the time figure out what is it that this teacher wants, what is it that this teacher wants. So we're not teaching a principle. We're not teaching a godly principle of being respectful of authority. And that truly is what we want to do, is we want to say, why do we discipline? Why do we have a discipline policy? It's so that we can become more like Christ and our hearts can be transformed and we can take care of sin when we sin, and we can restore relationships. So if you think of all of those pieces, you're really saying, how do we love one another? How do I love you and respect you? How do you love me, respect me? And how do we function in a classroom so that we can learn as much as we possibly can? We've got great stuff to do. And so what are the things that make that happen? So the first 2 weeks of school, they actually are really fun, because you have so much opportunity to teach and train. And so you're explaining, okay, we're going to go to recess. What do we need to do? We're going to line up. First of all, what's the line look like? If you teach kindergartners or first grade, even second graders coming back to school, as I discovered this year, the first line looked like a mob. And so I'll just look and say, you know, not a line. We can study lines in math, and that is not a line. I do not see a starting point, an end point, and straight in between. And so we're gonna practice again. So let's send them back to their seat. Let's practice again, and then praise like crazy. Awesome, wonderful job. Now, next thing, the line is there. Now it needs to be straight. And it needs to be silent. So we talk about putting our heads behind the next person's head, which they love to play with because some are taller and some are shorter. But you enjoy the process of training them. So you want them to know what the standard is. So we're going to line up, we're going to be straight, we're going to be silent, now we're going to go to recess, and recess is going to be great. And if we don't make it out of the hallway and down outside with a straight, quiet line, we'll just come back and do it again. And it'll take a little bit of our recess. What do you want to do? We want it straight and silent so we can get outside. Okay, good. So out you go. But you practice, you're training, you're helping them. We want their shirts tucked in. Okay? And again, why? Well, we're in a school situation. We have a uniform. A uniform shows that we're at school, at our job. Their binder is their office, and we want them to look sharp and be pulled together for school and ready to hit the day running. And so tucking in that shirt it's something that's, the foundation of that is much deeper than whether or not a shirt gets tucked in. Am I loving my neighbor? Am I being obedient to the standard? Do I love the place I'm at, and do we look like Oaksters? Or do we look like we're at the school for sloppies? That's the first grade teacher. Are we at a school for sloppies? Or are we an Oakster? So you're training them to love the standard, but you have to be really wise, because the same policies and procedures, if you're doing it just so that you can say, well, I told them what to do, they didn't do it, I put their name on the board, and now you take care of them. That's not the heart behind it. We're not loving them towards the standard. And so all of the first 2 weeks is really that time where you're training them. How do you raise your hand? How do I acknowledge you? How do you stand to speak? Another one that is often letting the teacher be the leader, not the second grader, because they start to anticipate you. And so I have a little boy who is future teacher. And I just tell him, guess what? You get to learn how to follow before you get to learn how to lead. So we're practicing following before leading. So you're helping them to learn why you're training, why you're doing what you're doing, and that we're delighting in it. And then, are there smiles? Is there joy? And so you can gauge whether or not you're doing that in a way that is training them towards what is good, what is true, what is beautiful, by the way that you're helping them the first couple weeks of school. And it is fun to see the number of names, check marks decrease. There are some students that come in, there's a day where there's 20 check marks, and you think, okay, Lord, we've got some work to do. And at that point, if tomorrow isn't less than 20, that's when you call home. Hey, you know what? This isn't officially name on the board phone call home, but what I'm noticing is Johnny has trouble with blurting. And so could you practice at dinner the raise the hand game, and so that he can do a little bit of practicing so that when he comes back to school tomorrow, he can see less check marks on the board, because you really want them to be successful, so that by the end of the 2 weeks, they're all saying, okay, I understand this. And really, I feel safe because I know what the expectations are. And so just some of the implementation of the policy, I think it's first, the teachers have to decide that discipline is a good thing, is absolutely the most loving thing to do. And our students now, why do I discipline you? And they will respond, because you love me. So that's the place you need to get in your school, to where the students and the teachers and the parents realize that this is the most loving thing you can do for your children and for your school, and for the teachers themselves also, because it is a delightful place to teach when you're working in unity towards making your hallway smell like fresh baked bread. Because you can look and smile at the teacher that's leading their class down the hall, and you can see the little one that's peeking out around the corner, and you know you're working together. So you're working as a team to help train the students to really love what they're doing. So I can't imagine teaching in a school without a discipline policy now. And it was hard when I first came, because I did come from a school that didn't have one. And I thought, wow, that seems a little hard, a little harsh. I really don't want to put names on the board, and I certainly don't want to take anyone to the office, because that just shows that I didn't do my job. Oh boy, that is wrong thinking. No, I need to love my students enough to want to visit with the principal, and then I became that. God has a great sense of humor. And then also, one of the sayings that I had for them is, hey, you're in a bramble bush, and this is Paul Tripp. You got into the bramble bush. You're not in the office because you're getting into trouble. You're in the office because I'm helping you get out of it. We want to, you're stuck. And if you keep going the opposite way, you're just going to get in deeper, and it hurts. So let me help you come out of the bramble bush. Let's take care of the sin. Let's seek and be forgiven. And I love walking back to class with students after they've been in your office, and there is absolute true restoration, a heart change, and they are skipping across the parking lot. And that's after I gave him a spanking, and that was interesting too, is just learning how to be able to do that and believe that that was the best thing for the student. But to have them leave the office with a smile, you could see the shoulders. They're forgiven. It's the gospel in action. And then they go back to the class, they ask the teacher to forgive them, and back they are in their seat, ready to go. So yeah, it is a foundational piece of a culture of a school. And that's, I think, the point that I wanted to continue to make. Your school culture really is going to be affected by having or not having a policy that brings staff, teachers, parents, students all together. So.
What time do we have?
We've got 10 more minutes.
Do we?
Yeah.
Are you up?
Mm-hmm. I'm trading off.
Okay. Anybody want to ask a question right now? Yes, please.
How does this play out in high school?
Okay, good question. Yeah. All right. Watching the handicap guy try to put this on. Yeah, that's gonna be fun. All right, let's see how we do. Just stick it anywhere. Does that work? Okay. That's a good question, because it's kind of hard for the high school teachers or the logic rhetoric teacher. Do we still have to put their names on the board? I really want you to. It's very infrequent as a result. You don't have a lot of them. But yeah, name on the board, check mark. They still end up in the office. All right? So it doesn't change. Obviously, we don't spank. I think I spanked a sixth grader once in all those years. That goes away. It isn't necessary when you get to that age. And because of the culture, they don't end up back in the office hardly at all. It is very seldom. Now, it might be because the secondary teachers don't do a good enough job like holding the kids accountable. And so and that's our job, to be in the classroom and watching and seeing if that's happening, because they're blurting out. All right, good. If a child blurts out, what are they saying? I am more important than anybody else in the room. That's the exact opposite of what our ACE card says. Think more highly of others than you think of yourself. So you just help them. Understand, they don't think of it in that way, but that's what they're saying. I'm most important right now, and what I have to say trumps everything in the room. Well, gosh, you put it that way, and they start thinking, yeah, that's probably right. And no, I don't need to behave that way. And so you help them with how to behave. What you can, and this may shock you, and I don't know, hopefully it doesn't, because you're doing it well. I hardly ever had to call a parent about homework. We just never, is way overstated, hardly ever had homework issues. Hardly ever had to deal with a kid not getting their homework done. Because you know who's going to get a call? Their dad's getting a call. That's a big deal. It is a big deal when kids start not doing their homework. That just can't go anywhere. And your teachers need to know that cannot go anywhere. And I think it's probably still the same. We take 10% off. So if it's late, it's 10% off. And that's okay. That happens. But if it's persistent, with a kid, then that's got to be name on the board, deal with it, and call home. So they know. Because what's their job? They're students. That's their job. They get dressed in their uniform to go to work every day. Their job is to do it well. They're called to do it well. And so the expectation should be there. Such. Any other questions? Yes, please.
What about like collective issue? Say they're in line in the hallway and you're coming from another place and you know there's noise, but you're not sure who.
Okay, that's a lot of different questions, believe it or not. That's a whole bunch of questions. Because let me tick off one that just came to mind. I may not even get to what you want, I'm sorry. But this is important because principles are key. If you see it, what's your responsibility? Deal with it. God's providence, God ordained that you see it. You got to look at it that way. God ordained it. What if it's not your students? God ordained that you see it. You get to deal with it. It's not somebody else's responsibility. You don't get to walk out, oh, I'm so thankful it's not mine I have to deal with. Nope, that's not an option. You get to deal with it because God ordained it. Now, what happens if it happened and you didn't see it? You may not have to deal with it. You may not have to. It depends if it lands on your desk or, But if you didn't see it, God ordained that you not see it. Now that's where, how do we handle it? So if little Johnny's bullying little Susie or Billy out on the playground and you don't see it and Johnny's mom comes to you, you get to say, hey, I'd really like you to have your husband call Billy's parents. And help them understand why. God didn't ordain that I see this. That doesn't mean I'm trying not to. I'm not trying to avoid it. But in God's providence, because God's got something else in mind, and we got to see further down the road. So I'm just going to ask that you would have your husband call and deal with it. All right? But help them understand why you're doing that. That's a little bit foreign concept to them, but it's helpful. Okay, so one, if it's not your class, you still get to deal with it. And da, da, da. Now, if it's collective, I remember that word, and you're not sure who.
You do collective, like classroom punishment, I guess, not punishment.
Oh, for the whole class? Yeah, I don't like to. I don't think that's the best way to deal with it. It's easy, but I don't think it's the best way. So, you know what? When there is a number of kids in the room doing it, you know what there's lots of?
Names on.
No, there's lots of eyewitnesses.
Oh.
And God's providence, guess what? He just gave you a free trip. You got eyewitnesses. All right? And so you get to ask, who wasn't speaking? Yeah, that's a real interesting issue. Yeah, but who wasn't? Yeah.
You just said who
was not speaking. Who wasn't talking? Who zipped their lips?
Walk us through that, just because we do 5th and 6th. So say you walk in and you hear there's talking and you're guessing there's maybe 8.
But you probably saw 1 or 2 anyway. Okay, so they're disqualified. They're out the window. It doesn't matter. But who was talking? All right. Now, you got to talk about integrity, about the principles here. You're loving one another. You're not telling, because there's defiance here. We need to deal with it. And you walk through that, okay, and help them. They still may not, and you can't make them, but there will be other times when you want to say, hey, in history, just bring up examples. Were they loving each other in this event? In history? Were they really thinking the best of each other in this event? Okay, how would that look in our classroom? And you remember the time when they were talking and they weren't honest. Okay, how would we deal with that issue again? Okay, so it'd be something like that. But if God gives you an eyewitness, use it. So, out on the playground, Johnny and Billy get into a fight. Our rule at the Oaks, I haven't got into, it's not a grace because we can't spank. If there's 5 things that they go to the office for. This is important. So automatically, no name on the board, no check mark. I can really go around an issue to get to it, can't I? Is fighting. That's just automatically you're to the office.
So can you actually go a little more in detail on fighting?
Well, if it's anger, if there's anger involved and there's aggression, that's fighting.
Okay.
All right. Inappropriate language, automatically an office visit. Lying, cheating, stealing. I lump them all kind of together. So cheating on homework, cheating on a test, cheating on a quiz, looking at somebody else's paper is stealing. Lying, cheating, stealing. Those all are automatically to the office. And then blatant disrespect to an adult, automatically to the office. They're gone. All right? Now, fighting out on the playground. Two little boys are getting into it. And you see it, you go over, you take care of it. What are they going to tell you? He did it. And the other one's going to say, he did it. Okay. Was there any witnesses? That's what I want that teacher to find out who's out on recess or whatever. Did anybody else see it? Nobody else saw it. All right. God's providence. They get sent to the office. They share their stories. They don't line up. You have to be really wise right now. And you may not have all the answers. And guess what? If God doesn't give you all the answers, you can't create them. You don't have to go all the way down that road. But you still get to call both dads and say, hey, you might want to check this out when they get home. And have the dads figure it out. Because ultimately, they're responsible. But you know what happens? This is what's beautiful. When it happened the first time, and it's happened many times since, those kids come in and they sit down and they know it's a good culture. And they say, it was my fault. I started it. Did he hit you back? Nope, he didn't hit me back. Do you want that type of a culture? You better believe it. Do I still spank the little guy? Sure, but I tell him, ooh, that was good. And I wanted Dad to know it was beautiful. I wish you could have been here to see it, type thing. But it's beautiful. And you want to create that type of stuff. And you tell kids, you know, you have your morning meeting and say, I just want you all to know, you don't have to be specific who the child was, but this was great. This is how we should love one another. We're thinking more highly of others than we think of ourselves. All right, are we out of time? Yeah. All right. Yeah. We're out of time. What can I say?